Hello, here's a quick look at the Singapore Exchange's annual report for the 2014 financial year ahead of the annual general meeting at the NTUC auditorium on Thursday, the 25th of September. Now, once again, as always with these reviews, you should look at the document yourself, read it for yourself. For now, here are a couple of key points, and here is the annual report for 2014. What's most striking really about the year that's been, and you see this in disclosures like this one, which you can also read in the annual report, is that actually it's been quite a mixed year for the Singapore Exchange, with once again securities revenue. You'll find that here on page 4, and this particular chart, which shows you that securities revenue has continued to fall as a percentage or as a proportion of the total turnover at the exchange. You can see there that it's slipped back to around 33%. So about $1 in every $3 the exchange earns comes from securities. It used to be 38%, so now down to 33%. And at the same time, derivatives, which you also see there at the bottom, that's actually up to around 30%. So overall, what this shows you is that it's been a rough time in the securities market, but actually the derivatives market and other parts of the business are still holding up well. Let's look at those in greater detail. First of all, on this page here, you will find details about the securities market and how that performed and some additional commentary there. And here is the bar chart which shows you how that's meandered through the last 5 years, starting there at the left side of your screen, and then with one exception being on a downward trend. Now, in the Chairman and CEO's statement, you'll also find this commentary here under Outlook that in the long term, the Singapore Exchange is still committed to being a securities market and obviously growing some of their derivatives, commodities, and other products as well. And Michael Sin, who heads the derivatives side of the business, he's all smiles because this is what his revenue looked like over the last 5 years. And you can see there that it's just been on an uptrend. There are a number of other business divisions at the Singapore Exchange that shareholders should be aware of. For example, market data. Whenever you log on to a website that displays data from the exchange, stock prices, for example, index levels, the SGX makes money, and with this bar chart showing how the trend in revenue is going. And issuer services, this is the revenue figure there. I haven't talked about clearing, but once again, you should read the annual report for yourself. Don't just take my word for it. So overall, the picture that we see from the operations is that it's been a tough year in 2014, but they're still looking at growth as the economies in the region grow, and there are a number of other product and service launches on the way that will help to keep the growth going from here. Let's now look at some of the financials, and for that we turn to this page over here, which, as you can see, is full of numbers. So let me break down some of the key points here for you. The first is revenue. You can see here this is a 5-year history being displayed in the annual report. Revenue in the most recent financial year was down 4%. And here on my right, you can see on this bar chart how that revenue number has been performing. So again, there's no clear trend. It's been up some years and down in other years. Profit. Here is the profit line, down 5% in the most recent financial year compared to 2013. And once again, we do have some mixed results. And when we're talking about total equity, for that we have 5 years of growth. And you can see the line there well and truly on an upward curve. What's also interesting to note from this page is the mention of debt, and it just says nil, 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 nil for the last 5 years. So the company is actually quite cash rich, around $750 million, but no debt on the balance sheet. So obviously there's quite a lot of scope to continue to pay out those dividends. And speaking of dividends, for the 2014 financial year, if you're not already aware, shareholders are getting a total payout of 28 cents per share. Dividends is, of course, what people like to see. So 28 cents per share this year, 28 cents per share last year. So even though profit fell, they maintained the dividend. And once again, with a fairly substantial cash balance, why not? There's an interesting quirk about that cash balance because, as you would know if you've been following interest rates, they've been at or near zero for a long time. So here's the exchange's cash balance, you can see there, and a substantial part of that, in fact about 3 in every 4 of those dollars, is parked with one of 4 banks. And what interest rate are they currently paying? We find that here in the green section of the annual report further towards the back. And you can see that the interest rate there is a very, very low, less than 1%. And so the SGX, just like anybody else who's got cash, is currently wondering where those returns are going to come from. So that probably explains why the exchange continues to pay a fairly significant dividend, because it simply is a cash-generating machine. And again, come back to this page here, the table with the 5-year history that I was showing you before. When you look at the cash flow numbers on there, it's a very, very strong cash generator. And further down, can you see that further down here on this page? If you can't, don't worry. Here is the breakout. What you can see here is some very substantial margins with more than 40% margins for the last 5 years. So the SGX very clearly still generating lots of that cash. So we've talked about the operations during 2014. We've also looked at the financial position. There are a couple of other important points in the annual report from the Singapore Exchange. Here's Magnus Bocker, the CEO again, fronting the sustainability report. And sustainability is one thing which he, as the chief executive, feels very strongly all companies should adopt. But of course, he's leading by example. So what you'll find in this report is actually some very detailed information about how the exchange is trying to become much more sustainable. For example, here we have some comments on gender diversity. And what this 3-bar chart tells you is that just over half of the staff are women. This disclosure here shows you where their pay scales lie. And what you can see here in looking down this list of 9 job criteria, in other words, these are the job levels at the exchange. You can see at the bottom there that men still outpace women in terms of their pay if you're at the bottom of the rung, as well as at the top, while in the 8th position, that is the second from the bottom in terms of job scope at the SGX, well, that is still very much in favor of women. As currently, the exchange is gunning for just a 10% difference between men and women's pay. They've achieved equality, or within that 10% in 6 out of those 10 criteria. They're obviously hoping to improve on that. But again, the sustainability report goes even further than that. Here are some interesting things that you can wow your friends with in terms of some of the disclosures. Paper. Did you know that the exchange uses more than 23 tons of it and recycles about 12 of those? In terms of electricity usage, by the way, they're going to use more power, they forewarn, because now that they're at 2 locations, obviously, and they're looking to grow, so they're going to use more electricity. This is how their electricity usage has gone, and also in the sustainability report, their water consumption. But sustainability is not just about, obviously, the environmental factors and some of the people-orientated factors. It's also about other parts of the business that are going to impact the long-term impact on the community. And you'll read more in the sustainability report about SGX's engagement with the community. For example, something which you'll see on this matrix, very interestingly displayed as to what is important to them, as measured on the X scale, and also on the Y scale, what's important to shareholders. And you can see local community is of particular focus in this materiality matrix, as it's called. So listed companies, you see the example from the Singapore Exchange about what to do with your sustainability reports. A couple of other interesting parts that we came across in the annual report. Here we have the remuneration report. What do people get paid? And there's quite a lot of information in there about shares and share grants and so on. But I wanted to bring your attention to this particular table, which shows how much the directors are being paid. You can see at the top there that Magnus Bocker's salary is displayed right down to the last dollar. And that is a feature also of the non-executive directors listed further down the page. What that shows is, in fact, every single dollar that every one of those directors earned is disclosed, not in bands of $250,000 as we see so often with other companies listed on the exchange. They're going really down into detail. Interestingly too, at the bottom of that table, you can see that there is the total sum of just over $2 million. We'll come back to that in just a few moments. In fact, and the reason is that you're going to be asked to vote on one of these resolutions, which shows what the directors' fees should be in the financial year that's already started, FY15. And you can see from this particular disclosure in the annual report that they're again asking you to approve $1.5 million in terms of directors' fees, same as last year. But the thing is, as you saw just now in the table, shall we bring it up again? Here it is. The table shows that there is a sum of $2 million having been spent, even though $1.5 million were authorized. The reason for the discrepancy is that what you're authorizing with this resolution is how much the exchange can pay its directors, except for things like actually attending board meetings. So this is kind of their salary plus attendance earnings, whereas what you're authorizing with this resolution is just the salary part. And the discrepancy there is about $500,000. The other thing that you'll be asked to do is authorize the car for the chairman, Chu Chun Seng, former CEO of SIA, who's been the chairman now of SGX for quite a number of years. And so once again, he'll be trying to make sure that you please approve that he will get a car and a driver, a car that probably looks a little bit different from this one. So that's a quick whip around the Singapore Exchange Annual Report 2014. Remember, NTUC Auditorium, Thursday the 25th of September. It promises to be a very interesting AGM, not just because of this document, the annual report that you ought to read before you go, but because of other service announcements that might be talked about, some of the things that the exchange is doing to help grow the local market.